Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to Mahamudra for the People. So today I think we can move right into Sraha's Queen Doha, if that feels good. So we finished the King Doha, now we're going to the Queen Doha, and then the last is the People Doha, the masses. Mahamudra for the masses. But before we begin, let's take a little bit of time, about 12 minutes to rest into meditation, getting as comfortable as you like, can. Don't worry so much about your physical posture, just listen to your body, right? Listen to what you need. Right, and allowing your body to relax. We will take a page from Tilopa and letting go in this moment of everything that preceded this moment. So everything in the past, 10 seconds ago, last week, last month, last year, everything in this life, just let this go. And similarly with respect to the future, any kind of expectation, whether it be expectation of what your meditation practice will be like, or expectation of around the Queen Doha, or what happens later today or tomorrow or next week or next year, or what our Bardo experience will be like. Just let all of that go. And then letting go even of this moment, the present. Let go of any kind of performance anxiety. Let go of control. Let go of trying to figure anything out. And relax effortlessly into this experience. All right. So here we are, and we're about to engage in an exploration of Sra's Queen Doha. So, again, the story goes that the King Doha, Sra sang to the king. And this one, obviously, he's singing to the queen, and then the next is to the people. And so, there's a tonal difference between all of these, and so we'll just get into it. See where we go, and we'll follow, the same kind of technique that we were using, the same device, looking at this in terms of each stanza being kind of like a vignette, each one having a kind of individual, each one being an individual instruction that kind of basically forms like a mala, one and then the other and the other. And it's not necessarily entirely meant to be like some kind of academic treatise. Each one of these we can actually just kind of pick up at random, even in a kind of almost like a form of divination, and just work with each one, like tarot cards or I Ching or something like this, or reading eggs or chicken guts, all sorts of different techniques. So, this begins with this homage to the glorious Vajradikini, and then, welcome to the pure delight of pure awareness. And so this is divided into 3 sections. The first is on Mahamudra as an expression of the natural state, and then the second is Mahamudra as the way, right? So the way being, how to practice it, and then the third is the consummation of Mahamudra, or what we could probably say the fruition. And another way of looking at these 3 is goal, path, and fruit, right? The goal is, our intention to realize the nature of mind and a description of the nature of mind. The second is the path, right? The way, the means, the technique through which we will do this. And the third is the fruition, or the fruit. And so this is basically, what is to be experienced. And so in the beginning, Mahamudra is the natural state. It begins with, what is Mahamudra? And so Saraha begins by saying, movement or stillness, pulsation or rest. All existence is appearance and emptiness, and all things whatsoever have a sky-like nature that can never be lost in time or space. That is Mahamudra. And so the movement or stillness, right? This is mind. So in the last this brief meditation session we just did, there was probably movement, and then perhaps stillness at times, and then the kind of blended experience of both, whether pulsation or rest, right? All existence is appearance and emptiness, right? Everything that arises we can consider appearance. So there's the obvious, right? Visual culture, visual consciousness, right? But then there's scheduling, right? This sometimes happens when we meditate, right? We begin to practice, and all of a sudden, scheduling issues arise in our mind about, oh boy, today, tomorrow, Thursday, conflicts in schedule, the whole thing. Right? So even that is appearance. And of course, that's empty in the sense that there's no guarantee on one level that we'll be alive tomorrow, right? It's all hypothetical, right? Or, maybe I'll find out I won the lottery yesterday, and then I'll just hop on a private jet somewhere, go down to New Zealand and take Richard's place and just stay there, be a hermit. Right? So the future it's a hypothetical at best. right? And this is the emptiness quality of it. It's not, nothing is, perhaps things are intended or estimated to happen, like paying our estimated taxes, but it's entirely theoretical. And then, of course, when it comes to visual consciousness, everything appears, right? So just look around wherever you are, everything is in some form. But the reality of it is not necessarily definitively inscribed, right? The thingness, perhaps. There are designations around color and meaning and this kind of thing. Right? But the objects around us, while some of them may have meaning, they are not that meaning. The colors appear, but if you go like this, there are no colors. If there's this, I think I don't know if this is actually of Indian origin or Tibetan origin, but they often use jaundice as a kind of teaching point, right? So for the practitioner with jaundice, everything looks yellow, right, because of what happens to the eyes. And so the reality, the definitive nature of everything is relatively arbitrary, right? So everything is apparent appearance that is also empty. And all things whatsoever have a sky-like nature that can never be lost in time or space. This is Mahamudra. Right? Everything just is. And in our tightness, or sometimes, when we're very, very well educated, we have these ideas about the way things are, right? This is that. This is this. This is that. This is the way you do things, right? And sometimes, we buy in so much to these kinds of things that they kind of take over what things actually are, right? And so really, the essential piece here is that everything is free of label. Everything is spacious. Everything has a tremendous amount of potential, right? Because it isn't the way it appears, right? In the sense of in relationship to our intellect or concept or discursiveness. And so this begins with, what is Mahamudra? Mahamudra is this kind of flow, this easefulness, right? Whether there's movement or whether there's stillness, right? It's the same. So then Saraha goes on to say, the sky-like nature cannot be shown. It is beyond existence and non-existence, beyond assertion, negation, and all ontology, beyond verbal power and metaphor to convey. And this is what makes Mahamudra a little tricky. And if it could be conveyed directly by words, then, we would just have one book on Mahamudra and everybody would be enlightened, and then, there'd be no problem. But because it can't really be conveyed by words, and actually this is why sometimes, every so often, I come across somebody who doesn't like the way there's a lot of negation in the use of negative descriptors in these texts. It's like, it's not like this and it's not like that. It's not like this and it's not like that. It's not like this and it's not like that. Sometimes there are people who are really, 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 really habituated to being a positive person, and they're like, I don't like this instruction because it's all negative, right? So this is a good example of people's bias, their obsession with positivity. The sky-like nature cannot be shown, right? It can't be shown, right? It can be indicated. It can be experienced sometimes when there's a shock, for example, right? A surprise, or two things seem to be discordant, right? This places us in a state of almost like cognitive dissonance. And then we wonder, well, what actually is going on? And which leads us into an experience. It's beyond existence and non-existence, beyond assertion and negation and all ontology. So it can't be touched on through debate. beyond verbal power and metaphor to convey. So I think all what we can also say from this is that it is an embodied experience, right? It's not something that is, um, the product of debate, the product of study, all of this. And otherwise, all of these, great Tibetologists would be enlightened. But because they're not, we can see that it can't be explained that way. And Sraha goes on to say, but sky mind and things in themselves, these three distinct names are nominal caprice, meaningless, deceptive labels. So even when we say the mind is like the sky, right? The sky, it's not like the sky, it's not blue, it doesn't have clouds or the sun in it, right? That sense of spaciousness is just a metaphor, just a temporary term, right? It's not particularly real, right? Even mind, right? What's particularly interesting is that our idea of mind and the idea of mind that we find, described in a lot of these texts or songs or whatever is not the same. Right? So in the tradition, there's this discussion of, sometimes relative mind, or called sem. This is thinking mind of cognition. So this is the kind of thing that allows us to know to look both ways before we cross the street, or how to rent a car, or balance a checkbook, or people do that anymore. Get a job, assuming we all need jobs, all this kind of stuff, right? That's all the relative stuff. How to cook a meal from a recipe, right? How to discern, right? How to quote unquote think. So this is sem, and then there's rigpa, or awareness, right? Which is blended into the experience of mind, right? Because you can settle into awareness, right, within the context of mind, but it's also very separate too, right? And awareness, or rigpa, doesn't have a particular location, just like the mind doesn't have a particular location, right? Our mind, some people will say it's in the brain, or other people will say it's in the heart, right? But it's not in either one of these places. And Rigpa equally is like this too, right? So what Saraha is pointing out essentially here is that, we're using these relative words. It's important to not become very fixated on them, because we're talking about things that are exceptionally subtle. Let me just make sure these things are off, so I'm not getting pinged unduly. So then, all right. So then, so all of these terms are meaningless, deceptive labels, right? This is also really important too, because sometimes in our zeal, right, we can really hold on, right? Mind is spacious, and all of a sudden, if we experience some kind of stuckness, some kind of claustrophobia, then we freak out because we're preferencing a particular term, right? So it's also saying, let the language, let the way we approach all of this be as fluid as possible, right? Let's not take ourselves so seriously. So then he goes on to say, all seeming elements of reality are mind. For other than mind, not an atom exists. Whoever realizes original no mind gains the realization of timeless Buddha. Right, so all elements of reality, right? Every single aspect of, everything around us, everything from external phenomena to role, right? I'm a parent, I'm a partner, I happen to be male, I happen to be, white or something. Right? All of these things, right? They are real and they are empty. Right? Our appearance is empty. Our identity is empty. The space around us is empty. People text messaging me are empty. And this is not a way of negating, right? It's really rooted in, we can experience this when we settle into this spacious ease where we can let go of the constant application of label, projection, identification of all phenomena, right? External and internal. So in the last program, the King Doha, I think I said at some point, reality doesn't need us to prop it up, right? It doesn't care, right? We're not that important. Right? And yet we will wake up, it's as if we have all these buttresses holding up everything around us, right? Even the people. If you wake up next to somebody, it's how often are we buttressing their existence? Oh, this is who they are. This is who they are in relationship to me. That therefore, this is what I am. And in deconditioning, right, the release of all of these labels is an uncomfortable process in the beginning, right? Because we've taken, all of this to be so real, right? So all seeming elements of reality are mind. For other than mind, not an atom exists. So there's nothing outside of this experience. There can never be anything outside of this experience. Whoever realizes the original no mind, right? And so this is not the cognitive mind, Sam, or the mind of intellect. Right? This is the, we could say ultimate nature mind, right? Which is more akin to Rigpa or awareness. Gains the realization of timeless Buddha. And this ultimate nature kind of mind, this experience of Rigpa, is not located to Oakland or to Brooklyn or to Mexico City or to anywhere, right? It is everywhere. It is beyond this planet. It is beyond this solar system. It's beyond, it extends across the universe. And the ideas we have about all of this stuff, the relative world, right, makes everything smaller, 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 right, until it's just localized to right here to me, right? And then we experience suffering as a result. We experience the constant personalization of every single thing. Somebody looks at us and we're like, oh, why are they looking at me? Right? And they're just like, they don't even know why they're looking at us, right? But there has to be a reason. Oh, now they're disrespecting me because of the face they made. Right? And maybe they're just in a weird mood, right? It has nothing to do with us. Right? But we're constantly personalizing, constantly personalizing. We might stub our toe on a chair, right? And then we get angry at the chair. Who put this chair here? We do all of this kind of very odd stuff. Everything is just happening. Everything is just happening. Right? It's not all meant to get us. Yeah, and yes, there are sometimes some situations where that is the case, right? Where there are aggressions, right? And even those, though, are essentially the same way. And this is hard too. It's hard to release ourselves from that which has activated us, whether it's activating pain or trauma or activating pride. Somebody looking at us, oh, that looks great, what you just did. All of a sudden we feel propped up. Oh, so good. So good. I'm so good. Those other people are not as good as me. So, when we realize this, quote unquote, original no mind, right, this means that we're actually settling into an experience where the focal point or the perspective from which we're operating is no longer so myopically obsessed with us. right? There is an openness, right? Almost like sometimes, the word co-emergence is often used. So this co-emergent awareness of the sameness of self and other, right? Or the sameness of self and location, right? And in that moment, right, all the individual qualities of each one of us, whether our names are Tony or Lorena or Crystal or Richard or Travis or Claire or Rodrigo or Eric or Sally or Justin, right, or anybody who ends up watching this in the future, is the same, right? Is the same. So he goes on to say, Saraha, the 10,000 things are conventional names, no sensory element more than mere label. Essential nature arisen out of nothing, unrevealed, indemonstrable. How can that inscrutable nature be known? Only a fool asserts substantial self-nature. But then who can confidently deny it? It's all of the things, all of the labels, good, bad, middling, preferred, not preferred, enjoyable, not enjoyable, delicious, disgusting, um, spicy, sweet, savory, astringent. Yeah, I brought this up, I don't know, a little while ago. It's been a while, so maybe this will be fresh for some people. One of my teachers, Padang Rinpoche, was telling me that he, for a year, only ate astringent foods, and then for a year only ate sweet foods, and then for a year only ate spicy foods, and then for a year only ate salty foods, and then for a year only ate sweet, etc. He went through all of these qualities. And, he's one person I have met who had spent 40 years of his life in retreat, right? And so part of his practice was doing this kind of thing to completely disrupt all of the thing, right? And so astringent, for anybody who's been to India and likes bitter gourd, there's bitter gourd, there are all sorts of vegetables that are quite bitter, which I enjoy. But I know some people can't even handle a little bit of them on a plate for one meal, right? Or bitter. Rod and I went to this place in West Bengal right before COVID broke, and we were staying at this hotel, and at the buffet they had freshly squeezed bitter gourd juice, like a little shot of it, which is supposed to be very good for your liver. So I was like, I love it. It's like, so bitter. It's like bile, right? But anyway, all of the labels, right? All of the this is as if to say, Saraha is trying to force us out of our comfort zone a little bit. And maybe others who are not American are more lucky. In America, we really love to take our comfort, right? And it's our political identity, oh, like this, oh, our preferred foods, oh, we wrap ourselves up in it. Our preferred sounds, our preferred art, our preferred everything. We just, wrap ourselves up, and we surround ourselves by it, and then we feel safe. But we're not, right? We're prolonging pain. We're prolonging our suffering, right? By trying to completely buffer ourselves from the fact that none of these things provide true safety. None of these things provide true security. But the truest security is to recognize the spacious quality of mind. So the 10,000 things that are conventional names, no sensory element more than mere label. Everything, or most of the things we experience, tend to just be, referential labels. But he's asking us to practice beyond that, practice past that, or practice through that. Essential nature arisen out of nothing, unrevealed, demonstrable? How can that inscrutable nature be known? Right? How do we get to know this? How do we get to know past all of the qualities? Right? Another way of looking at this is, how do we let ourselves see things as if we're seeing them for the first time? When I worked in hospice, I worked in home hospice, and it was great because, sometimes people would be scared of where they were in relationship to their disease progression, and, scared of death, scared of decline. But the nice thing about being in people's homes is that most people don't have arbitrary objects in their home, right? Like the wall hanging behind Claire, right? I'm sure is there for a reason, and I'm sure there's a story behind it, right? Or behind Eric, right? And obviously all of my loud display, all of these things have meaning. Now, on one level, that's great. On another level, none of it has meaning, right? It just is. And so Sraha is really like, how can we stop and see that wall hanging? I can see the wall hanging as if for the first time. It's harder for Claire, right? It's easier for Claire to see all of this stuff for the first time. It's harder for me because everything has some kind of imputed meaning. So this means that our work is this work of deconditioning ourselves, right? Or releasing ourselves, especially releasing ourselves from having to do that work and constantly create meaning, constantly justifying everything's existence. Right? It doesn't matter. Again, it doesn't care about us. It doesn't need us. The wall hanging doesn't need us. My shrine doesn't need me. I need my shrine. That's how weak I am. Only a fool asserts substantial self-nature, but then who can confidently deny it? Right? This is our conundrum. I could say, well, I'm, listening to these talks on Mahamudra. I don't have self-nature, right? But it is so hard to actually work our way through that direct experience. And so Saraha goes on to say, if mind exists absolutely, then all things must be substantial. And if mind is non-existent, how can anything be known? Explore the appearances of mind and sensory elements, and nothing is discovered. It's again, he's pushing us to have direct experience. And this is where all of these songs, they're all unified by one thing. When this is, these are not meant to be deconstructed in an academic way. They're meant to be practiced. He's saying, distill the wisdom for yourself. I can't explain it to you. I will try. I'm singing the song to you. Right? But, you have to, we each have to make the first step, which is practicing. Right? If mind exists absolutely, then everything is like some kind of heaven, like eternal kind of quality. Right? It's not an eternalism. Then if it's insubstantial, then there's no meaning, no anything, no, experience. But that's not true either. Right? It's between these two things. But we have to explore the appearance of mind and sensory elements, and find that nothing is discovered. And how do we do that? We do that through meditation. Just settle. And boring old meditation. Dusty old meditation. But he says, then seeking the seeker again, nothing. In time, nothing substantial arises or ceases to be, and whatever arises never changes, and its nature is pure delight. All appearances are Dharmakaya. All sentient beings are Buddha. All volition and action are forever Dharmadhatu, and all mental constructs are rabbit's horns. We live in such pessimistic times now, right? With the climate crisis, right? Particularly now, right? It feels like these past 2 months, like the weather has been extreme everywhere I've been, right? It was extreme in Mexico City. There's that heat wave, right? It's extreme now. There's smoke, from Canada. There's floods just happening like this. There's, you know, intense heat. Like somebody was telling me about temperatures hitting 60 degrees Celsius in Spain last week. In the high 40s in Italy, Greece, right? Celsius. And then there's a political situation in the United States. Everyone is just butting heads constantly, right? Everything is very depressing and intense, in the American political system now, everything, there's no truth anymore. Everyone's just, spewing this made up stuff every which way, right? And so you don't even know, even if somebody wants to be an informed citizen, now has to do all this extra research to see if any of this is true. And then you go outside and I was talking with my wife last night about how sad it is that it's likely that we may all develop respiratory problems, in the next 10 to 15 years, just given how bad, the air quality is. And we're thinking about our kids, very young, like, may they not have that, but we could totally see how that could happen. So why am I bringing this up? Because everything seems so stacked right now to make things like Mahamudra very hard. Right? And it is important to remember that even in the midst of all of this chaos, and even in the midst of all of this environmental, destabilization and degradation, that all appearances are Dharmakaya, that all sentient beings are Buddha, that all volition and action is forever Dharmadhatu, that all mental constructs are rabbit's horns. This is hard. This is like a harder time to practice it now. But it's important. And I also truly feel that there's a really strong sense of resilience that arises from engaging Mahamudra as a way of releasing from the constant tension, right? The constant, almost like constant sadness or constant brokenheartedness or constant, pessimism. Right? And I don't disparage people feeling pessimistic, because there's not a lot to be positive about. And though, we mustn't forget the view, right? Because then we just get, it's interesting. We begin to kind of watch ourselves go down the slippery slope of intense suffering just by looking at our phones, right, for a news app or something. Remember the true nature of things. So then the next portion of the song goes on under the rubric of showing that failing to intuit suchness, we are deluded. So Saraha goes on to say, this wheel of life, the light of the unclouded sun is all embracing, but the eyeless live in perpetual darkness. The innate absolute is everywhere, but deluded fools are blind. Right? The light of the unclouded sun is all embracing. But the eyeless, those without sight, those without vision, those without the ability to experience it, live in perpetual darkness. The innate absolute is everywhere, but deluded fools are blind. And then we have to ask ourselves, we don't have to ask ourselves if we're fools. But, sometimes maybe we benefit from doing that from time to time because we get so proud. Right? This can only be done by ourselves first. Doing this work of opening up to see, to experience. And I was 2 weekends ago. I was talking with Mahamudra and my friend Tequila at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and one of the things we were expected to kind of address was resilience in the face of climate change, right? How to address eco-anxiety. Right? And so this is what I guess I was bringing up before, is this sense of hopelessness, right? The sense of intense fear, being disturbed by everything that's happening. And it behooves us to look past the problem. The problem is, unfortunately, my particular feeling on this is the problem's already done, right? There's nothing we can do, right? The estimate by climate scientists is that we've misread everything and that everything is 2 times as bad, right? And so, it is very likely that we're not going to be able to effectively repair much of this, right? And so the question is then, too, is, how much of our agency are we truly going to lose, right, in the midst of all of this? And we have to decide. We have to decide for ourselves. And what I'm not saying is don't be unrealistic. Yeah, but I don't think there's necessarily any kind of hard line of separation between the view that we find within Mahamudra and trying to be a human navigating the climate crisis. And if we let the problem be so insurmountable that we can't touch into the vast spaciousness of mind, then we are done. Right? In this way, we have to be disruptors. Right? And that's, disruptors through, like Mahasiddhas. Mahasiddhas have always been disruptors, right? Disruptors of, conventional thought, disruptors of conventional response, disruptors of assumption, disruptors of labeling, right? Even if the world were completely on fire, right? The adept Mahamudra practitioner would still be able to touch into spaciousness. Why can't we? Like, what prevents us from this? This is a really important question to ask ourselves. And, there's no right answer, right? But we're all very different, right? We have different relationships to this. Some of us could have been activists for decades and just feel angry and shut down. Like, I can't, I'm just angry, right? Others might feel like, I didn't create this, right? Maybe I participated in activities that helped create this, right? But it's not specifically my fault, right? There are many different positions to have. None of them are necessarily right. Right? But the large point here, though, that Saraha is making, that I think we really need to listen to, is that we have a huge impact on our relationship to suffering, we need to kind of stand up and determine, you know, where we're going to go with this. The innate absolute is everywhere, but only deluded fools are blind. You know. He goes on to say, in our failure to intuit no mind, our fantasies occlude mind's true nature. Like a madman who plays with evil spirits, we pile futile suffering upon our head. Playing with the ogres of reification and dualization, we provoke so much meaningless pain. And we provoke so much meaningless pain. Playing with the ogres of reification and dualization. Oh, things should be this way, that way. Mind should be like this. Experience should be like this. I should be like this. Everything should be this particular way. Like a madman who plays with evil spirits, we pile futile suffering upon our head. I'm a little interested right now, it popped into my head, about can we do something like take the Praktimoksha vow and the Bodhisattva vow and not feel that the weight of everything lay on our shoulders? Right? I think the one thing I see with a lot of people is the weight of all of this. It is on my shoulders. I need to fix this. I need to address it. And Saraha is saying, for each one of us is like, this is messed up. Like, I got this big heavy load on my back and I need to help change it for others. And Saraha's like, hey, like there is no you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that's inconvenient. There is no you. And that big weight, you're carrying that around. Right? Why? Right? So what I'm interested in is what prevents us from letting that go. Right? It's almost like a different kind of thing, like some kind of generational curse. Right? You hold that weight and you think you're real. Right? So that's like the best way to curse somebody. You're real. May you think you're real. Right? But this is part of our problem, right? This, it's so interesting, right? Like this, I don't remember where I first came across this, but and maybe it is kind of like the Western materialist like view of ourselves in relationship to the world, especially in the natural world, right? That it exists for us to use, right? And ironically, somehow we're also the keepers of it, right? So everything exists for us to use, and then everything is also, it's also our responsibility to care for it, to be stewards of it. And all we are animals who happen to be here. Right? We're no different than deer and crabs and horses and viruses. Or maybe we're like the best virus or parasite. Right? But somehow we've come to own everything, even our fear, even our brokenness. Right? We own the earth. Right? We own the oil. We own the minerals. Right? With all our fracking, all this stuff, we own the gas that exists in shale. Right? We own part of the moon already. Nations have already laid stake to that. Right? Once somebody gets onto Mars, like that's going to be all owned. But then we own our suffering. That's mine. This is my cross to bear. It's so insane. I mean, it is, and one has to wonder, like, this kind of goes back to the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma, right? Like with respect to, the dissatisfactory nature of samsara. Right here we find ourselves in this particular form of samsara, where we own it all, including our suffering, and we can't put it down because we won't give ourselves permission. Meanwhile, there are these naked people like Sraha and Lopa and Naropa who are all weird, Maitrepa. They're dancing around and they're like, there's no you, there's no me, there's no any. It's like, 1969 or 1968, right? And we're like, oh, I'm stuck in this hell realm of carrying around my pain and my suffering and my trauma, and I can't let it go. I won't let it go because it's me. I'm simultaneously the person who's destroying the world, and I'm simultaneously the person who is tasked with being the steward of the world. It's a no-win proposition. And who created that? Exactly. And then we have the hubris to act as if we're the most, we're a first world country, like most educated. But it's actually kind of like a joke. This all of a sudden, if we practice Rushan, you're like, oh, this is a bunch of different realms happening at one time. This is hell realm, many, many different kinds of things. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, is it okay to
Of course.
earbuds? I'm really interested to have your opinion, Justin, on what you're talking about is something that plagues me a lot, this burden. But for me it's a conceptual burden. What I'm really interested in, based on an experience I had yesterday, which was a sort of absurd standoff with a bus driver who wouldn't let us on the bus and was trying to run us over, is how to work with turbulence. And it seems to be, what the example I just gave you is, in the scheme of things, is very minor. And, but the same situation could apply to, being in wartime or being in a fire situation where you can only rescue one person from a house and then you have to deal with the fact that the other people died, or, you can think of myriad examples of that. But there seem to be two things going on. One was my inability to access Rigpa in the midst of this absurdity. And then the other was waking up in the middle of the night and realizing that there was this intense turbulence in my chest, and I was revisiting the situation and finding myself coming up with different ways that I could have dealt with it and so forth. But the real point is the turbulence in my chest, and find presence in that moment. And I kind of worked through it, and it became a situation where I was looking, well, who the hell is actually experiencing this, and where is he, and so forth, which is okay, post facto, but not so okay in the moment. And I'm just wondering what your advice is on how to work with that sort of turbulence, which is not conceptual. It's more than just SEM. It's physiological.
Yeah.
And what your thoughts are about that, because I know other people experience it, and even after a lifetime of sort of dancing around Tibetan Buddhism, when it really comes to the crunch like that, I'm kind of helpless in that moment. And that's minor compared to what people are dealing with all over the world on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, no, thank you, Richard. I think, one of the things that makes these things so triggering is that we feel them physiologically, right? And so it's not even necessarily, I think for most of us, it's not the the more obvious thing, which is like, oh, this person's being unreasonable, or whatever it is, right? They may be being that way in the moment, but the response that that's creating, or the reaction that that's engendering, is physiological, and then that becomes much harder to kind of, quote unquote, process in the moment. So I mean, I think that's the thing to begin to listen to first, or maybe to begin to feel into an awareness of the somatic as it occurs, because this is also like when we find ourselves re-traumatized. Sometimes we could be laying in bed at night, and then all of a sudden we find our body going through the same physiological response, and then it takes us right back to the memory. So that's one thing. I think in one way, like if it helps us maybe to kind of check our practice. If our practice is all in the mind, right? Well, there's some benefit in that, but if it's not rooted in the body, then we don't necessarily have the capacity as quickly to kind of respond to that, or even necessarily recognize it in the moment, right? So there's that, right? Working on developing a greater awareness of the somatic, or physiological response. When Rod and Tequila and I were together, like, one of the things that kept coming up was the environmental crisis, because of all of Tequila's work doing that. And I was feeling I was feeling disturbed by how undisturbed I was, in all of that. And I think a lot of that just has to do with kind of my typology. We kind of actually talked it through a little bit. Like, I think I'm just a little bit more of like, I brought up actually how in the Bhumi Sparsha retreat in September, or September, I think it was October, I led this practice of grounding into space, right? Not the ground, right? Not earth. And I find grounding into space is a lot more helpful, because there's this, it's not a disembodiment, but it is a lack of kind of like habit of becoming overly concerned about what's happening constantly around us, right? And then Rod said something so beautiful and simple, which was, he was like, yeah, we happen to be here, but this is not our home. And I think this is a helpful way to think of being in relationship to all sorts of, the myriad problems that we find ourselves with, whether it's like in the US, our completely unworkable, not only unworkable political system now, but the extremity with which, everything seems to be arising, right? Everything is just so extreme. The fights are so intense. The reactions are so intense. And we are here and we're doing our best, but this is not our home, right? And even with a world that is dying, we happen to be here right now. And, all three of us agreed that is why we are here right now, right? We're not here to solve the problem, but we're here because we picked being here now, right? Reincarnating at a time when a world system may be, beginning to fall apart, or very quickly begin to become destabilized. And there may not be life on this planet in 200 years, or at least life the way we have known it. And so part of this also has to do with view, right? So even in that moment, the bus driver, who is not only being, irrational, but threatening to run you over, right? The threat is, on one level very real. On another level, there's a lot that gets triggered by the meanness, me and you, self and other and all of this. And I think also with respect to the climate crisis too, remembering the broadness of the view, right? If we walk into a small room and it's on fire, right, it's gonna be overwhelming, right? But when we recognize the reality of the situation, right, at least according to the view of our tradition, right, that we're here and we're here to do work, right? Practice, be here for people, right? Try to do what we can for this place. But this is not ultimately the only place, right? This is not, this is not there are many world systems. Yes. We could be born, unseen beings, reborn this way. So like this is not to minimize everything too. But I think the thing is like, on one level, we can't, on one level, we need to hybridize our practice, meaning, get out of being overly Tibetan about things or Nepali or Bhutanese, right? And that's not who we are. None of us here. We can have deep love and appreciation and respect for, the kind of heritage cultures from which, the Buddhist traditions have arisen. Right? But there is a hybridization that needs to happen, right? Where the Dharma comes into us and what arises is something new, right? Something very indigenous. And recognizing the even larger aspect of the view so that we don't get too stuck in what an American or a Mexican or, New Zealand based, Vajrayana looks like, right? The entire, like the breadth, this is like, when people bring too much of a Triyana approach to Mahamudra Dzogchen. Mahamudra Dzogchen, I mean, not to be a jerk, like transcends a lot of the dualism that you find, in the ways in which those traditions are expressed as well. And it's not to say that it's better, but sometimes the process is different. I don't know if this is making sense.
Yeah. It's making perfect sense. However, the question I have, I think, is, in the situation yesterday, which is sort of so fresh in my mind, I could have just stood on the pavement and said, okay, you're not going to let me on the bus. You go ahead and I'll just wait for another 6 hours for the next bus. Or I can challenge it.
Yeah.
Now, in the challenge, it was incredibly turbulent. And there was an opportunity there to practice. And my question to you was, was one of technique, really, which is how to address that incredibly turbulent situation in the moment. And the follow-up question is, it would be easy as a Buddhist to just look at situations and step aside and let them be. But there's also value, is there not, in attracting every now and again a turbulent situation in order to test yourself and see where you're at with, dissolution of self and other and so forth. And if you don't do that, then when the shit really hits the fan, you're ill-equipped to deal with it. So that's the sort of domain I'm querying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean, so it's like Dharma protectors, right? Like Dharma protectors can show up because they can hold that, right? That's part of their practice, is to hold the intensity of anger, right? Or straight up rage, right? And so rage is not a bad thing. Anger is not a bad thing, right? Becoming completely destabilized and getting up and assaulting somebody, that's a problem, right? But so holding all of the intense heat of our rage in the moment is a great practice to do. Right. And so you can, with complete justification, say, hey, look, what? This next bus doesn't come for 6 hours and I can't, for a whole host of reasons, you know, just wait here, right? And you can push me aside, but let me onto the bus at least until, whenever, right? But in that immediate, intensity, like there's nothing wrong with, even if you're feeling murderous rage, right? That is energy to work with, energy to hold. I think the thing that gets challenging, right, is this physiological response, which leads sometimes to the sense of nakedness, right? Like, because we feel it so strongly, right? It can't be kind of, diminished through a thought experiment, right? Through Lojong or something like that. Because you're just like, I'm ready to fucking kill you. Like, there's no question here. Like, and fine. But what are we going to do? Like, what am I going to do with that in that moment?
Absolutely. I mean, it's so destabilizing that the question is, how do you access Rigpa when your chest is
is to be clear,
upside down, because the other person, and it's not just, my determination to get my way, it's also in this case, hatred of the bus driver for me interrupting their schedule. And so it was a sort of two-way energy conflagration, if you like. And accessing Rigpa in that moment is just enormously difficult, to become spacious. And not to be lost in the confrontation. Sorry, I'm taking it up so much.
No.
It seems like a particularly sort of Vajrayana question for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, no, totally. I mean, I think in one way, like, again, going back to awareness of the body, like recognizing, the kind of two-way street here. So like, if somebody is like kind of split open by their rage, right, and we're aware of that, right? So part of what we can do to address this is to begin to address that physiological response by breathing, right? Or, even visualization technique, right? Become Hayagriva, let yourself, or Vajrakalaya, just like let it just, Vajravarahi, like just let yourself be in that fire. Right. And so once, when there's an initial reaction of that, and we're able to, I mean, this is what Tantra is all about, is the implementation of, physiological response, visualization response, mantra response, right? Sound, body, speech, and mind, as a way of helping us to be able to kind of hold these things, right? I think sometimes that works so much better than other things. But I don't think, I'm definitely not advocating for, just being Om Shanti about everything. And I'm not advocating for being Om Shanti about the environment too. But when in the face of paralysis, right, we have to get a little skillful, right, in engaging the difficult emotions that lead us to the experience of paralysis through working with our body. Right. And some of these things, in the moment, it might be too triggering to, skillfully maybe address some of these now, but over time, especially with respect to the body, especially with respect to breath, like learning that I have so much more control over, shifting the experience. And the thing that's hard, right, is that there's also this kind of like, movement, maybe now more so than ever, in at least American culture, maybe Western culture, where people are like, it's not my fucking job. It's not my job. It's like there's a new form, this is kind of what we're seeing a little bit with these Jonah Hill things, the text messages, right, with this use of kind of therapy language, as a way of, trying to control other people. Right. And so we have this too, that we need to be careful of, like approaching Dharma in this way too, where we're like, I'm fucking pissed off. It's not my job to do anything. You're the one who created it. You're the fucking problem. You need to get out of here. Right. Like there is a kind of a big movement, towards people just saying that, like, I'm putting up boundaries because I can't deal. And there's, sometimes it goes a little it can go a little too far, right? So, we need to be able to gauge for ourselves what we can and can't handle. I think, though, I feel like somehow I'm always getting into conflict with people. There's something just about that aspect of my nature. But it also means that I'm kind of comfortable, sometimes more comfortable with conflict than lack of conflict. And some of that's good, right? So I think we can also benefit from placing ourselves in these situations to titrate up a little bit too, our ability. Because if we're just constantly super Om Shanti and then something happens that's really challenging, then we're not going to have the skill set. I think sometimes it's just a matter even of that.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I was just, I mean, what really resonated with me was, manifesting as Vajragrahi in a situation like that. I've found that very helpful indeed in the past. And so there's value in sort of engendering minor crises in order to practice that, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. And this is one of the reasons why I stayed at Rikers for as long as I did, was because, there's a kind of an understanding that there is a homeopathic benefit to my practice by being in this place of intense suffering and violence and chaos and all this stuff. And this is what the Mahasiddhas teach us, right? Is that there is benefit in being in the places that nobody wants to be, right? There's benefit in being, living with untouchables. There's benefit in eating the most impure things. There's benefit in completely destroying my social standing. There's benefit in doing all of this kind of stuff, right? There's such an intense Puritanism in the United States, at least, that I think sometimes it's so ingrained within us, it's hard to see. And I think the more that we're able to kind of mess with that and even show up on purpose in weird ways, or different ways, right, helps us to be able to stay. And it helps both sides of the equation, because when everybody's like, oh, I only want to hear a particular kind of response, and it's like, well, I'm not going to give that response. Like that challenges that person. That's good, right? And then of course it challenges the person who's like, well, I'm going to be totally different about things, and now, this whole group of people doesn't like me. That's good to not be liked. It's these kinds of things. It's helpful. There's
like Eric says, start twerking.
Yeah.
That would have been hilarious. And
Yes.
yeah, I would love to have had the creativity in the moment to do that. Hey, Justin, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll just say one other thing is that, what's really closely aligned to this, Richard, is the practice of illusory body. Right. So like, Gyaltsen Rinpoche, told me, some stories of folks who would, provoke people to beat them, so that they could then have to deal with that level of threat, right? And even if the threat is not necessarily physical violence, but expulsion, for example, like, you get out of here, like, who do you think you are? That's powerful. And there is a long-standing kind of thread of this kind of practice in the tradition of deciding to practice that way, right? I'm going to be the person that nobody likes on purpose. I'm going to, be the person who breaks the rules in the place that's completely surrounded by rules on purpose.
That's incredibly challenging. If you choose to do that in moments that really matter to you, if it's a situation that doesn't matter, that's a lot easier. But you're right, and those sort of practices would have worked me better for what happened yesterday, and so I can see the real value in it.
Yeah. It's just, again, I it can feel insurmountable, but I think if we treat it like some kind of have a homeopathic relationship to it, then I think things get a little, becomes easier to approach, easier to digest, slowly, So, yeah, thank you. Let's see. So we're more or less at time. So I'm going to make a note of where we are here. And so next week, I won't be able to be with all of us because I'll be out in Crestone at this retreat there. So maybe we can have a practice session, and then after, I'll be back, and I'll be back to the regular schedule. But maybe we can dedicate the merit now to yes, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, dedicating the merit to all Mahamudra practitioners so that they can begin to experiment with having a homeopathic relationship to that which is difficult. May all Mahamudra practitioners here and elsewhere, seen and unseen, known and unknown, be able to pick up different aspects of the apparent world or appearance and play with it. Play and have fun. Play and experience joy. Play and get triggered, and then look into that triggering. Right? We are all here, and we don't own this place. Right? So there's a lot of freedom in this. Right? So may all Mahamudra practitioners be able to recognize that they're really just vagabonds. Like, may you not take anything super seriously. Right? And may you all support one another in that process. So, take very good care, everybody. Be well, and I'll see you soon.